Hello, lovely being. Welcome to another video guide through Blueprint to the Heart Sovereign Healing Journey. And today we are going to be going through the chapter talking about childhood trauma and how childhood trauma affects us later if this has not been addressed. And all the different ways that childhood trauma can show up and all the different types of trauma and exactly what trauma is and how it affects us internally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. And really just taking a deep dive into what this can mean for you. I am Elaine and I am author to Blueprint to the Heart. And this is the book that we are going through. If you want to get your personal copy on Amazon.com, you absolutely can do that. So I'm going to invite you to just think about your childhood for a moment and really think about what experiences you had in childhood. What word would you use to summarize your childhood? And think about if you felt emotionally nurtured, if you felt that your parents or a parent was emotionally negligent or was emotionally there for you. If you felt that you had to put on an act or that you had to stay in line, what were your feelings and some of the biggest things so- that you have taken from your childhood? Some of us may know that we've had an abnormal childhood, and some of us may just be in adult life wondering why we don't have relationships that stay long term. Or why do we keep falling into the same relationship patterns over and over again? Why do I fall into addictions? Why are these cycles that keep showing up that I don't know why I keep doing that? And I encourage you to look at and to maybe shift and consciously excavate what your perception of your childhood was. Now, why would I ask such a thing? To be quite honest, a lot of us don't know how disconnected and atypical our trauma or our childhood may be until we begin to look at what. So, first, let's actually take a look at what trauma is and how that plays out. Because we hear the word trauma so much, and quite honestly, for me, it's so redundant that a lot of us have the actual grasp of what trauma is, because trauma is not an actual event. So once we actually take a look and recognize that trauma is not an event, that what happens within you is the trauma. The trauma is actually the disconnect. It is how our physical body disconnect from our emotional body, our neurological being. Trauma is the actual disconnect that happens when there is a strong emotional influence. All of us perceive different situations at a different level of emotional influences. So, depending on how we were taught or not taught, depending on if you want to go back to the other chapters like childhood development, the previous one, and our also like parents' upbringing, if we go back and we take a look at the factors that go into how we learn to perceive these situations, if you want to go back to the other video guides and take a look at childhood development and take a look at how the precise time of events that happen when physical and physiological and neurological things are developing is actually how we're able to understand why certain events created such a strong emotional reaction and how our trauma has impacted our lives. It does not matter the situation that happened. It can be anything. If it is a strong emotional response, your body will shut down the mental ability to be able to process in order for your body to continue to move. It is the disconnect between the body and the brain. It puts us in a state where we are actually able to live through the strong emotional reaction. To recap, trauma is not the experience. Trauma is what happens within us. It is how our body and our neurological and physiological systems respond to the stimuli, to the experiential stimuli. People can be like, I didn't have that many traumatic things happen, but yet when we're actually looking at what was really going on within there, it doesn't have to be a terrible thing. In order for it to take effect on your physiological and your emotional well-being and the way that you process the events that are happening, because essentially what trauma is, it disables your ability to actually process the events that happen. And so that is why later on in life, while like all of a sudden we have these things like, I thought I worked through this. I thought that I didn't have such a bad childhood, because our system is finally coming to a point where we feel like we can process it, and our brain and our neurological pathways are starting to like really break down. And that allows for us to see that, wait, something isn't actually connecting here. Like, we aren't living a life that is fulfilling and feels like happiness. Like, we are not happy within our life. There's something that we are missing. And that is why backtracking allows us to actually figure out where it went awry. And a lot of times there's many different things that created that, which is okay. And so childhood trauma there's so many layers to it. I started looking at the core reason of why I started using drugs and alcohol, and why I started using the addiction to relationships as a drug, and why I could not stop using it. The pattern for me, the continuous cycle of using and abusing any and all substances, along with using a lot of people to get my needs met, I was not getting to the core of it. I kept putting a Band-Aid on it. Like, I kept going to 12-step programs. I kept going to therapy, and I kept going to like all of these things that are great tools. However, the core of why I even started to use anything exterior outside of myself in the first place was not being addressed. I remember thinking that, because so many times when we get into recovery, or we want to stop using drugs and alcohol, or we want to stop being in addictive relationship cycles, we think of, I just want to be back to the person I was before I picked up. I want to go back to the person I was before I was in this relationship. And the truth is, no, we don't, because that person was the person that thought they needed the illusion of a substance, an addiction, a dependency of some sort in order to feel a wholeness within. What I feel unaddressed childhood trauma means for me, and what I see within society at large, is unaddressed childhood trauma creates the disconnect from actual love, from self, from trusting our wholeness as we are. And what Blueprint to the Heart helps guide us in is getting back to the core of who we were before any of the programming and any of the constructs and the jaded ideas and the perspectives that were put upon us by unhealed aspects of other people. So this chapter of childhood trauma does go into a lot of the basics of what childhood trauma is. I have this, it's a seriously amazing core healing tracker. So when we begin on this journey of learning, when we hear the word trigger, we hear this again. This is another word that is so used within this community of people who want to develop personal boundaries, who want self-help, who want to improve, and all of those things. We hear triggers. So what triggers actually are is an unmet need or a defense mechanism against something that it's an emotional reaction to a stimuli. So the trigger is actually showing us where that wound is. Triggers are not the problem. The problem is how we learn to use the triggers to find the truth of where that emotional wounding is, because you can use the emotional hurt as a guide as to, okay, what is this strong emotional reaction telling me? There is an owie there. There is something that hurts that is wanting me to address. And so you can go through and look at, and majority of the time it is from our childhood. It is from spaces that were not met as a child. So this core healing tracker is honestly, it's such an amazing tool to use. We can trace back these emotions and trace them back to what instances and what experiences have we felt this way before. And taking it all the way back to our childhood, we're actually able to pinpoint the core wound of what these experiences are. Now, this doesn't happen just one time. It is many layers of however many times, decades worth of triggers, right? So then we go into the childhood experiences. What are some of the similar experiences that you had that where you felt this way? Are there other times or other things like that have this has happened to you? What is it that this trigger is wanting to tell you, about your past? What is this trigger wanting to show you about where we are not seeing? So this core healing tracker in childhood trauma chapter. And this is how this is a tool I've created for myself in order to use. And yes, I have used different type of things that I've seen in therapy. I mean, years of therapy, so many handouts, and this is something that I've created and have condensed from all of those handouts. The next in this chapter is ACEs. So ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And this is really just an overall or a general tool for us to begin to look at. It's something that therapists have used to get people to say, if you have this level of, what is it here? So this questionnaire, it results the score of how many like adverse childhood effects that you've had. And it shows us the higher the score, the higher risk of negative outcome. Some of the questions are like, did you have a divorce when you were younger? Did the parent or adult in the household swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you in a way that made you afraid or a way that you might be physically hurt? So it goes into these like details about your childhood. It is, again, it's a very general thing. It's an idea to understand, okay, so maybe some of these situations may have had more of an effect on me than I am aware of. The effects of childhood trauma, how that plays out in our physical, emotional, and our overall mental well-being. Uh, what are the different ways that this can play out for a human later on in life? So this will be as a child, you learn to get your needs met in certain ways. And a lot of times, like trauma goes as behavioral problems, right? So a lot of the kids that probably have some behavioral issues have some things going on at home. Trauma shows up for children in ways that we might not have listened to or be open to seeing. And it is only later on in life that we maybe are able to start putting these pieces together. So emotional cues. So I'm just going to use me for an instance, right? I was a very shy person. I was very awkward. And so I started using drugs at a very young age. I started drinking at the age of 13, and smoking cigarettes in sixth grade. And I started being sexually promiscuous at the age of 14. And what else? I hung around with the bad crowd. I had friends that did the same things as me. So it was very normalized and very natural. I didn't have the contrast to show me that I was like doing anything normal because I was in a space where this was totally natural. What else? Financial trauma and insecurities. So this plays out in how you view your self-worth, how you view what you are worth within the world, and how to move about in the world in order for you to make money or in order for you to do things that you actually love. A lot of us that have had significant trauma are so disconnected from what we're actually passionate about and what actually makes us happy that it takes so much undoing and unbecoming in order for us to actually relearn what joy is and tap into the space of what when our innocence was lost. The trauma that we experience as a child takes away the innocence. And learning that you are not fucked up, and that there's nothing wrong with you, that you had these events that happened that changed the way that you physically and physiologically and neurologically respond to the world, knowing that there's nothing wrong with you, that you had events that created the way that you move about in the world is huge. And so when we're looking at childhood trauma, it is to show like that so many of the situations that we experience are a part and a huge part of the problem, that it shows why we chose the way that we chose or why we move about in the world. What we choose for jobs is based on a level of security. But sometimes we have so much trauma that our immune system, like we become sick. So for me, even in my healing path, in my healing journey, I would physically get ill. I physically could not continue pushing the way that I was any longer. I was able, and I'm so privileged to be able to actually take time to be able to and heal. I was really sick for a few months, and it granted me a space to see that I have a lot of physical healing to still do. Childhood trauma often plays out into poverty as well. Not all the time, but I'm thinking again of my experiences and people that I have worked with. So poverty perpetuates poverty. It and so when I have found myself in this cycle, it's like taking care of this childhood trauma or looking at that really. So a lot of us or some of us are able to actually push through and just keep going and going and going. And we're all built differently. We all process information differently. We all have emotional cues that make our body respond differently than others. And some people would get sick from untreated trauma, and some people are just work is their addiction, money, power is their addiction, and then they just continue onward. And actually, what I'm seeing with people like that is that their relationships are crumbling, that they put so much into the addiction of work and money and power that that it's coming out sideways. Eventually, this catches up to people. Eventually, it comes out sideways. It comes out somewhere, right? It's interesting when we're looking through childhood trauma and all of the different things that happen. Let's see. When the body keeps score is that's a book to look into. The body keeps score tells us that it doesn't matter if we remember the trauma or not. Our body is what actually holds on to the traumatic experiences. It is what shuts down our systems at that time of the emotional fragmentation. It actually stays imprinted within all of our systems, within our immune system, within our neurological system, within our physiological, and it breaks down and it blocks the way that our body is actually able to process a lot of the environmental stimuli and the environmental triggers. So, meaning like all of the carcinogens, we become more susceptible the more unhealed trauma that we have within our system. trauma collects within our physiological system. Now, and these are just all things that we may have not looked at because there weren't the dots to connect then. And beyond even just the physical and emotional well being of that, what are some of the coping skills? We haven't learned coping skills because we're a society that is not based on actually learning what the emotional awareness, emotional intelligence is. Our society is basically built on the fact of just keep doing, just keep going, keep pushing through that, and never mind the emotions that are showing up for you. And that is also creates a perpetual cycle of, of systemic trauma because coping skills is almost non-existent within our society. I agree with me or not, that's okay. But what do we think of when we think of cope? How do we cope with stress? People go to bars or they have a drink or they smoke some weed or they take some pills or they have all these external things that they rely on to regulate their stress. It's just a band-aid. It doesn't actually help with any stress. It actually breaks down your immune system even more. The more that you hide behind all of those exterior things, the more that the less resilient to stress we become. It's just, again, we're just slapping a Band-Aid on. We're slapping a Band-Aid on a bullet wound and expecting it not to bleed out. And eventually it will. And it has. I totally see this within society and how, like, how dependent we are on everything. So if it's not drugs and alcohol, then it's social media, a way to numb out and to be constantly connected to others within the realm of the internet. So that is absolutely an accepted behavior at this time. Learning these coping mechanisms without learning. So, first, you would have to learn what your emotions are. First, you would have to remove any of the things that are covering up your emotions. Excess working, always on the go, power and control, drugs and alcohol, any substances, constantly being connected on the internet. Right. Those cover up and distract us from our true emotions. In order to learn how to actually emotionally cope, like to take away all of those things, that to allow the emotions to show up, to learn, and then to actually acknowledge what the emotions are, name the emotions, and then being able to learn the coping mechanisms to work with the emotions that you have been. And like, so it's not just like, it's a systemic problem that is so wildly and widely accepted that this has become just so normal and natural for people to reach for those things to relax or to take the edge off or whatever that is. This is like the long-term effects, the coping mechanisms, right? So no matter the scale of trauma you had experienced, there's something there that keeps you reaching for something other than within yourself. Yeah. No matter if you are reaching for something other than within, there is something that is disconnected. There's something that is being overlooked. And that is, again, why it's so important to look at childhood trauma and to look at things that we may not have seen as being trauma or as being an emotional response. The more that we normalize these things, right? Because we've normalized the abnormal things in life. We're a groomed society by government and by consumption, by consumerism. I thought that I had a normal childhood, right? I was like, I was given everything more materialistic when we were actually pretty poor. I was given everything and I went everywhere, but that was the thing because it was emotional negligence. And so it took me years until like none of my relationships were working out. I was miserable and am suicidal again, to begin looking at, wait, actually, that wasn't normal. that wasn't normal. Oh my gosh, those things that I always just thought were a part of life weren't actually a part of a healthy or a healthy life. That wasn't a helpful life. There's other things too. A lot of times we overlook the developmental stages and the experiences that happen during developmental stages. We just take that as just a normal part of it. And a lot of times, like I said, that gets overlooked, and that is actually where we need to go. Another reason why we find out when our child is trauma, because we normalize it, because it's become so accepted through the generations. It's just been something that, like, and even if we say something is off, people don't actually know how to handle that. So, the suppression of memories is another way why we wouldn't actually know that we had a disconnected childhood, because we suppressed it. Sometimes it happens where we aren't able to recollect these memories because it was such an impactful experience that a whole quadrant of our brain will shut off in order for us to not remember it, because it would be too much for our body to handle. Through time and healing, that I do feel, for me, some of those memories did start to surface when I felt safe enough within my body to actually begin recalling them. But I'm just stating that the shutting off of the memories is actually a protection. Your body goes into protected mode where it allows you to be able to live without reliving the memories over and over. Also, when we are younger, we don't actually have the language and the communication skills to be able to tell people what the hell happened. And quite honestly, we don't understand it. We don't understand it. It's confusing. We are fragile little beings. We don't actually know what's happening. And we put all of our trust into these adults that also don't necessarily know how to be emotionally nurturing and there for a child. They just know how to keep them surviving. And the children really don't even know how to put language to that. And typically, then the whole family doesn't necessarily have the capacity to have the language or the knowledge of what that even is. So it just perpetuates through generations. The other thing is the social stigma. So a lot of times we don't look into trauma because there's so much built around what trauma should be, what trauma is. Well, a lot of and that just how we're able to normalize and justify things around such a stigmatized topic in order to it's all a safety and a coping mechanism. So the point of learning about all these different layers and all these different ways that childhood trauma can come up is in order for us to begin connecting the dots so we actually uncover the core of our authentic living, the core of our hearts, the essence of who we are. So again, I mean, there's many things like the emotional absence. We overlook this, but it is absolutely just like it is so traumatic. Even as a baby, that is traumatic. If an emotionally absent parent, and that will absolutely leave you to attaching to negative and destructive behaviors and ways to get your needs met as an adult. Ways that this can also be played out through financial and employment instability. A lot of times, like I said earlier, a lot of times people who have a lot of trauma in their past are unable to keep jobs, or for many different reasons, right? Whether that be because they don't know even what they want to do, or they are addicted to substances and are unable to keep jobs, or they keep moving over and over. There's so many different reasons why, but it all comes down to the core of what happened to create that pattern. Then next, this all goes into like our decision making ability. If we're always in this space of wanting to, if we are in this space of like survival, if we're in this space of highly emotional reaction, we cannot make the accurate decisions that actually will help us to flourish in life. And choosing the choices, we don't actually have the tools to create the life that we see for ourselves until we address all of the things that happen. The previous chapters, up until this chapter, they go into how the beliefs were, like how the story of trauma was even created. So that would be like all of the historical context and bringing us into the limiting belief systems that made people so disciplined, abusive, and how that became normalized, and how the stigma around mental health and addiction really perpetuated and festered out into society because of the war, and then people not wanting to ask for help or knowing how to ask for help. And then it goes into then how that affected our parents, and then how that affected our parents and how they raised us, and then how they raised us based on their wounded selves, and also affecting the way that we develop. So it's important to look at, you can start here, but also to know that we childhood trauma is not the beginning of it. It goes even to understanding how there was a space for you to even get traumatized in. And I think that's really important, because then you can really understand the problematic society that perpetuates this, and that it isn't just you or your parents, it's everybody. We really don't have the tools. As a society as a whole, the tools are becoming more and more available, but really it is not there right now. There is nothing wrong with you. Your experiences are so valid and probably were more impactful than you recognize. And so you don't have the tools to actually create the life that you feel you were meant to live. Make sure that when you go into the following questions, that you are grounded, and and that you are in a space to allow yourself to slowly navigate some of it, because it is like there's some of the specific events or experiences that you had that like really stand out. Like, what caused the most pain? Those are hard things to look at, and don't do it all at once. And what are some of the patterns that you see within your life today? And where do you see those patterns from, like your parents? Or how do you see, like, where did that begin maybe? So I also have a happy place meditation. This meditation you can listen to, and I will put the link below. This meditation you can listen to before you begin to answer the questions. And you can always come back to this meditation. What it is, it brings you to a place in your childhood that you can viscerally feel, sense, smell, all of it. So you're able to actually bring yourself to your body when you are working in these tough areas. Also know that allow people in to let you know that you're going through a process and that you may need other emotional support. So because there are a lot of questions to be answered, and I mean, you can use the happy place meditation in any time, really. And then so another very fun and unique exercise that I had while going through my healing process, I did a lot of art therapy while I was healing. And so art has been a foundational piece for me in tapping into my inner child. So I would say that art allows for people to express the things of the words for the words that they don't have. Art allows us to express the things that words cannot express. And so you don't have to be an artist at all. It is just a matter of getting dirty, trying new things, and allowing yourself to express. So here, the This is an art therapy exercise. So you can create a representation of what you like, what your inner child was like, or what your childhood was like. This is bringing an image of your younger self, a time when you may have experienced a traumatic event or a highly emotional event, and allow yourself to visualize yourself from the clothes you were wearing to the expression on your face. And if you can, begin to create this visual representation of what that was for you. So, whatever those feelings were, inside that visual representation you can put on the painting, drawing, sketching, whatever that is. It can be abstract. Like I go in and I paint with zero idea. I go in and I just paint and I just zone out and use colors that I like at that time. It can be abstract or it can be detailed. It can be anything you want. The point is to just create and to allow an expressive part of yourself to come out in ways that you wouldn't have. Again, this can be a lot for you to take in, so please be mindful of your process and to be mindful of what you are experiencing within your body and to remember to ground yourself. There are grounding exercises within this book, but also to look at how to emotionally be there for yourself, to allow yourself the whole process, the whole messiness of it, and to allow yourself to be there for you. And no matter what that looks like, without any judgment. That's what this is about, is learning how to be there for you in a space that is non-judgmental, that is compassionate, and that is safe and secure for you. You create that space within you. You create that for yourself. There are many tools to help you with that, and yet that is within you. It takes practice, and you can do that. Again, I want to thank you all so much. I hope that this is helpful, that is able to guide you through that book a little bit more. And if you have any questions, you can email me and you can follow me on my links are all in the description box. Until next time, I am sending an immense amount of love.